Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're listening to this. This being Comic Cuts, our 13th week as a video. You can chart the course of these videos by the length of my hair, which is now 13 weeks shaggier than the very first video that we did way back in April. So this is Comic Cuts for June the 19th. I was hoping that there would be another interview, but unfortunately circumstances dictated that I didn't have a chance to actually do one. What happened was a problem with my computer, which I've certainly not run into before, was a corrupt file. The file itself was quite an important one to me. It was the S section of my Who's Who of British Comics. 104 pages of notes, 54,000 words, so almost a book in itself. When I opened the file, there were meant to be 104 pages, but something was clearly wrong right from the beginning. The same small section from the top of the file was repeated for page after page after page, and in fact I think it stopped repaginating at 15,000 pages and just gave me a message telling me that the file was corrupt. To put people's minds at rest, I was eventually able to recover the file, so the file is safe. I'm not sure what caused the problem. It seems to have been caused when I closed the file on Saturday, which was the last time I looked at it. As I said, it's quite an important file to me because I've been working on it only recently. 3 of the artists who I've been researching for the Longbow book, their surnames begin with S, so I've been working on the file quite extensively. The 3 artists being Keith Shone, better known for Braddock of the Bombers, Rodney Sutton, who's best known as a girls artist, and this is one of the few times he actually switched over to boys comics, and Martin Salvador, who contributed quite heavily to things like the Thriller Picture Library, Eagle, and various other titles. So I've been working on the file recently, and certainly with Martin Salvador, I've just very recently written a 1,500-word essay. All my notes about Rodney Sutton's work, I'd written up quite an extensive stripography of his work dating from about 1958 to I think 1990. So that was quite long, even though I hadn't actually written up an entry for him. And Keith Shone was, again, I've been updating the notes so that I can write an entry for him in the Longbow books. So you can imagine I was not that happy to discover that the file was utterly corrupted, and that the work that I've been doing over the last week and a half potentially had disappeared. Anyway, as I said, the good news is that I managed to recover the file. What it highlighted was that I hadn't done a backup of my computer since about August 2018, almost 2 years ago, although I do transfer quite a lot of files over to external hard drives, but that's simply because I lack space on my computer. I keep running out because I deal with quite large files. Even these video files are going to fill up what workspace I've got on my computer. So Tuesday was a bit of a write-off, as I say. I copied about 250 gigabytes of information and data over to external hard drives. I back everything up to 2 hard drives for safety purposes, so that should one hard drive break, I've always got everything backed up onto a second hard drive. And normally what then happens is that I buy 2 new hard drives, working on the principle that if one's broken down, then the other one might also be on its last legs. It can work out quite expensive doing that, but for safety's sake, I'd rather have 2 new hard drives and spend a little bit of money. And the cost of hard drives is coming down all the time. They're generally, every time I buy them, they cost roughly the same. I'm spending about £80 maybe per hard drive, but they've doubled in size. I've had 1 or 2 disasters with external hard drives breaking down and losing data. In one instance, I lost a lot of music. There's one book that I wrote some years ago that's completely gone. I've got the printed copy, of course, but all the text and illustrations have gone. To live on a farm, perhaps. Where do old manuscripts go? I don't know. So yeah, the Who's Who, I've mentioned this a couple of times on the video now. What happened was that back in the 1980s, I had everything compiled on paper. I've still got those Archlever files full of paper notes. They're at the back of the office on the shelves that you can just about see over my left shoulder. I got my first computer in 1989 and started typing up all the notes that became the indexes that were published in the early 90s. So the Lion Index, the Buster Index, the Valiant Index, the Fleetway Companion were all typed up on that computer. I was also in correspondence with a couple of collectors in France, Gérard Thomassen and Dominique Petitfort. And it was kind of for their benefit that I compiled a list of artists who had contributed to British comics. And that was the very first, albeit just an outline, of a Who's Who that I compiled. Over the years, I've added notes whenever I've stumbled across information, or I've been working on something that required a little bit of research into somebody's artwork or somebody's career. I've always tried to add notes to that outline. So it's grown and grown over the years. The A to Z is split across something like 35 files. And as I said, the S file alone is 104 pages and 54,000 words. So you can imagine what the whole thing is like. That's not to say that it's all in readable, legible form. They are rough notes for the majority of artists. I recently stumbled across a couple of things that I think might interest you. These date back to 1992, when I was involved in a book called the Comic Book Price Guide for Great Britain. The first thing is a short history of British comics, and each year I do a market report updating readers on what had happened in the history of British comics over the past year. What you won't have seen is this is from 1992, and one of the ideas that we had was to do some British artist biographies. Now, these weren't solely British artists. These were some big names from around the world. So the first one on this sheet, for instance, is Leo Baxendale, but number 2 is Massimo Belardinelli. I'll try and put a couple of pages of these up so you can see them while I'm talking. But this was the first attempt at writing up biographies. Some of them are based on articles that I'd already written. There's one on Jesus Blasco, for instance, that dates back to early 1990, when I was planning to do a follow-up to the Mike Weston story. So that was my very first attempt at anything like a Who's Who. There was another attempt back in 1995 when I was editing Comic World. In the last few issues of Comic World, there was a few brief entries of a Who's Who. Unfortunately, the magazine folded before it could really get anywhere. Maybe one day it'll all come together and I'll be able to sit down and actually compile the whole thing. It's not a book. If you think about the number of creators who have worked for British comics, it would have to be hugely selective. So I've always tried to give some coverage to everybody who has been involved in the creation of a comic. But of course that means that there are thousands and thousands of names to cover. It would be a multi-volume book, and I'm not sure that it would sell enough to justify the time I would need to spend on it. It can take me a day or two to write each entry, especially if I have to go and dig out comics and read stories and things like that, just to make sure that I'm on firm footing when I write somebody's entry. It's something that I do want to do, so hopefully I'm going to be approaching it from a slightly different direction in the course of the next project that I'm thinking of doing. So it's something that I'm certainly going to come back to discuss on these blogs, and hopefully it'll be something that interests you. So it's, as I said, it's something I will come back to. Anyway, the book's progressing. As I said, I've been writing biographical sketches of some of the artists this week. The problems I had on Tuesday then spilled into Wednesday. I had a lot of catching up to do. So no interview this week. Fingers crossed I'll get back to some semblance of normality next week, and you won't have to put up with just me. I think that's all the news that's fit to print. Unless you really want to know, we got a new table for our TV. which we found for free. Rather pleased about that. Our local second-hand bookshop has reopened, so I'm very excited about that. I'm planning a trip down there later today or tomorrow. So slowly everything's coming back to normal, although while we can pick up our food locally, I don't think either Mel or I are planning a trip into town for a couple of weeks. We do have a friend coming over on Sunday. We're going to set out some chairs in the garden, so it'll be rather nice to see him. Hopefully next week I'll not only have an interview, but I'll have some more news on the Longbow books, some prices perhaps, and some news about when to expect them. Okay, well, that's it for another week. Hopefully you've not been put off too much by the flickering of the light. Again, we've had some beautiful sunny weather during the early part of the week. I come to do the video and we've had torrential rain. So unfortunately, that's meant a rather flickery video. But if I'm to edit this all together, I need to do it now. I can't leave it until this afternoon. I apologise, but hopefully things will improve by next week. All right, I will see you again next week. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy these, and do take care. All right, bye-bye.